You're watching Press TV's Top 5. We're coming to you live from our headquarters in Tehran. Many thanks for joining us this hour. Now, the Russian Defense Ministry has cast serious doubt on claims that an airstrike led to the destruction of an aid convoy in Syria. Russian Defense Ministry spokesman Major General Igor Konashenkov says further examination of drone footage of the convoy shows the trucks were accompanied by a pickup truck of militants with heavy mortar gun. He also says that the militants were using the convoy as a cover. Konashenkov earlier said the attack on the convoy did not appear to have been from an airstrike. However, the White House says all information indicates the assault was an air raid, holding Russia responsible and blaming it on either Moscow or Damascus. Russia strongly denies the allegation, saying it could be aimed at distracting attention from earlier airstrikes on the Syrian Army positions by the U.S.-led coalition. Well, joining us to discuss this further is James Jatras. He's a former U.S. Senate foreign policy analyst, and he joins us via Skype from Washington. Many thanks for joining us here on Press TV, Mr. Jatras. Now, first of all, as we've just mentioned, the footage that has been released by Russia is going to cast some serious doubts on the claims being made by the White House. How do you think this is going to play out?
It might cast some serious doubts for anybody who is carefully weighing the evidence and trying to figure out what actually happened. Unfortunately, that's not what goes on in these circumstances. This is a pattern we've seen before. We saw it in Ghouta in 2013. We saw it with Aleppo boy a few weeks ago, obviously in Aleppo, where something happens immediately, within minutes, if not hours. Western officials are making accusations as to who was responsible based on partial or even some cases zero evidence, and that runs all the way around the world, where all the mainstream media pick it up and give it saturation coverage. And then when people start to pick through it and say what actually happened here, you won't see anything like that coverage to cast doubt on the first story in the major media that carried it in the first place.
Well, of course, as you just pointed out, Mr. Jatras, over here key is the media's ability to ask questions and to look closely at the evidence being provided. However, over here we do hear the Russian side saying that the blame that the U.S. is putting on Moscow or Syria as far as this attack on this aid convoy goes is to distract from what the U.S. did as far as killing the Syrian Army positions in Syria. Now, do you see it that way too?
If this convoy was in fact hit by some of the anti-government terrorists, again, as a kind of a false flag to blame on the Russians or the Syrians, that could very well be the case. You know, as they say, a lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is still putting on its running shoes. So even if we, and again, I don't know what happened. I don't have the evidence in front of me. But if it turns out that the Russians or the Syrians were not responsible for this, maybe the foreign media will carry this, and maybe they will reevaluate what the initial accusations were. But I can guarantee you virtually nothing will appear in the American media, which take their marching orders from the government.
All right, but Mr. Jatras, looking at the way things have panned out ever since the onset of this quote-unquote ceasefire, which clearly hasn't lasted, is the U.S. a willing partner over here? Because right now we did hear U.S. President Barack Obama in his UN address also raise the hope, or the specter at least, of being able to come to the negotiating table once again and come up with a political solution.
Yes, we did. But we have to keep in mind what Mr. Obama means when he talks about a political solution. By hook or by crook, it means somehow coercing the Russians into agreeing that Assad must go. That's what he means by a political solution, and even though he may have muted that in public, that objective has not changed in the Obama administration.
So would you say the recent events that have unfolded when it comes to Syria would become the hallmark of Obama's legacy as he leaves office?
I think he's trying to keep it at a simmer until Hillary can get in and bring the United States in a more forceful way into the war. I don't think there's much he expects to do with this much longer. I think the concern really in Washington, and I think there are some differences of opinion within the government, but the concern is that if East Aleppo is liberated by Syrian forces, strategically that makes a huge difference in this war, and they want to keep that from happening. I think lip service to the ceasefire is essentially a political ploy to blame the Russians and the Syrians for the collapse of the ceasefire and somehow to keep the jihadist forces alive.
All right, let's leave it there for now. That's James Jatras. He's a former U.S. Senate foreign policy analyst joining us via Skype from Washington. Mr. Jatras, thank you very much indeed for your comments here on Press TV.